My fiancé invited my bully to our wedding. I never imagined that a single name on a wedding guest list could end an entire relationship. 3 months before my wedding, everything in my life seemed to be falling perfectly into place. After 4 wonderful years together, my fiancé, Ryan, and I had finally finished planning almost every detail of our wedding. The venue had been booked. The invitations had been mailed. My dress was hanging safely inside my closet. Even our honeymoon was fully paid for. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe I had finally left the worst chapter of my life behind. Unfortunately, some people have a way of finding you, no matter how far you think you've moved on. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Ryan and I were sitting at the dining table, organizing the final seating chart for our reception. Most of the difficult decisions had already been made. Family members, college friends, co-workers, neighbors. One by one, we checked every name against the guest list. Then, my eyes stopped. At first, I assumed I was reading it incorrectly. I blinked once, then again. The name didn't change. Ashley Morgan. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. It felt as though all the air had disappeared from the room. Ashley wasn't an old friend. She wasn't a distant cousin. She wasn't someone either of us had seen in years. Ashley Morgan was the girl who had made my life miserable throughout high school. Some people remember high school as the happiest years of their lives. I remembered mine very differently. Almost every painful memory somehow involved Ashley. She never needed to hit me. She never threatened me directly. She was far more skilled than that. She spread rumors that followed me from classroom to classroom. She convinced classmates to avoid sitting beside me. She laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear whenever I answered a question incorrectly. She mocked the clothes my mother struggled to afford. She turned every mistake I made into entertainment for half the school. The teachers rarely noticed, and when they did, they dismissed it as teenage drama. Eventually, I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. I spent most afternoons hiding inside the library because it was the only place Ashley rarely visited. By graduation, I had become so accustomed to avoiding people that loneliness felt normal. Leaving for college wasn't simply a new beginning. It felt like escaping. Over time, life became better. I found genuine friends, built a career I loved, met Ryan. Little by little, the memories lost their sharp edges. I didn't forgive Ashley. I simply stopped allowing her to occupy space in my life, or at least, I thought I had. Seeing her name on our wedding guest list brought everything rushing back. For several moments, I couldn't say anything. Ryan noticed my expression almost immediately. He glanced down at the seating chart before calmly explaining that he had added a few extra guests from his side after receiving several last-minute confirmations. At first, I assumed Ashley must somehow know one of his co-workers. Maybe she had married someone in his social circle. It seemed unlikely, but possible. Then I noticed something else. Her name wasn't listed beside anyone else's. She wasn't attending as another guest's wife. She had her own invitation. Ryan had invited her personally. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I looked through the entire guest list again, hoping there had been some kind of mistake. There wasn't. Her name appeared exactly where every confirmed guest should have been. For the first time since Ryan proposed, I felt genuinely uneasy. Not because Ashley would be attending, because my fiancé had invited the one person he knew had hurt me more than anyone else, and somehow, he had never mentioned it. I tried convincing myself there had to be an explanation. Ryan knew almost everything about my past. He knew why I still hated school reunions. He knew why I never returned to my hometown unless absolutely necessary. He had listened patiently while I told him stories I hadn't shared with anyone else, including the stories about Ashley. That was why this felt so impossible. He hadn't forgotten. He couldn't have. Which meant he had made the decision anyway. That night, long after Ryan had fallen asleep, I quietly opened my laptop. I searched Ashley's name for the first time in over a decade. Her social media profile appeared almost immediately. She still lived only an hour away. She worked in marketing. She smiled confidently in every photograph. Looking at those pictures, it was almost impossible to imagine the person who had once made another girl's life unbearable. Almost. Because some memories never completely disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to return. And something told me. Ashley wasn't coming to my wedding by accident. She had been invited for a reason. I just didn't know what that reason was. Not yet. For the next few days, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Ryan had never given me a reason to doubt him before. He was thoughtful, patient, the kind of person who remembered the little things most people forgot. He always knew which songs made me emotional. He remembered the anniversary of my father's passing every year. He even avoided driving past my old high school, because he knew the place brought back memories I would rather forget. That was exactly why Ashley's invitation made so little sense. If anyone understood what she had put me through, it was Ryan. The more I thought about it, the less I could ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. A few evenings later, while Ryan was in the shower, I opened our wedding planning folder again. Every invitation had been carefully organized. Family, friends, co-workers, +1 guests. Everything was listed alphabetically. I wasn't searching for Ashley's name anymore. Instead, I wanted to know when it had been added. After comparing several saved versions of the guest list, I noticed something unusual. Ashley hadn't been part of the original invitations. She had been added less than 2 weeks earlier, long after the guest list had supposedly been finalized. That discovery only created more questions. Why invite someone at the last minute? Why someone from my past? And why keep it from me? For the first time since our engagement, I began paying attention to details I normally would have ignored. Ryan seemed distracted, not distant, just preoccupied. He checked his phone more often than usual. Occasionally, he stepped into another room to answer calls. When I asked whether everything was okay, he always smiled and assured me it was simply work. I wanted to believe him, but trust becomes fragile the moment doubt enters the room. Even the smallest changes begin to feel significant. A week later, I met one of my closest friends for coffee. She had known me since college and was one of the few people who understood how difficult high school had been for me. Without mentioning Ashley directly, I asked whether she believed people truly changed. She thought about the question for a long time before answering. Some people did. Others simply became better at hiding who they had always been. Her words stayed with me long after we left the cafe. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I searched Ashley's social media again. This time I looked more carefully. Most of her recent posts were ordinary. Work events, weekend trips, family celebrations, nothing unusual. Then I noticed something that made me pause. Buried among hundreds of photographs was one taken nearly 3 years earlier. The picture showed Ashley attending a charity fundraiser, standing only a few feet away. Was Ryan. They weren't posing together. They weren't even looking at each other. But they had clearly been at the same event. At first I dismissed it as coincidence. Ryan attended charity functions through work from time to time. It didn't necessarily mean they knew each other. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a missing piece of a much larger puzzle. The following afternoon, another coincidence appeared. While confirming final details with our wedding venue, I overheard one of the coordinators mentioning that an additional guest had recently requested special dietary accommodations. Curious, I glanced at the updated attendance sheet. The request belonged to Ashley. Next to her name was a handwritten note, confirmed personally by groom. The words seemed innocent enough. After all, Ryan was the groom. He had every right to confirm his own guests. Yet something about seeing it written so plainly unsettled me. Ashley wasn't attending because someone else had invited her. She was attending because Ryan wanted her there, deliberately, personally. By now I had stopped believing it was an accident. I simply didn't know the reason. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected envelope arrived in our mailbox. There was no return address, no stamp. Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a single photograph. Nothing else. No letter, no explanation. Just an old high school yearbook picture. Mine. Across my face, someone had drawn a thick black line with permanent marker. The same thing Ashley had done to nearly every photograph of me during senior year. For a long moment, I simply stared at it, Jen. The memory hit me instantly. Back then, dozens of students had laughed as those pictures passed from desk to desk. I had almost forgotten that day. Almost. My hands began to shake. Someone wanted me to remember. The question was, who? And why now, only weeks before I was supposed to get married? I didn't tell Ryan about the photograph, at least not immediately. Part of me wanted to believe it was nothing more than a cruel prank. High school had ended over 12 years ago. Surely no one still cared enough to reopen old wounds. I slipped the photograph back into its envelope and hid it in the bottom drawer of my desk. For the rest of the evening, I acted as though nothing had happened. Ryan seemed perfectly normal. He talked excitedly about the honeymoon. He showed me ideas for our first anniversary trip. He even joked about how nervous he was to dance in front of nearly 200 guests. Watching him laugh made me question everything. Could someone who looked at me with that much love really be hiding something? I wanted the answer to be no. But doubt has a way of changing how you see ordinary moments. Once it appears, every smile feels rehearsed. Every explanation sounds incomplete. A few days later, I decided to visit my hometown. Officially, I told Ryan I wanted to spend the afternoon with my aunt before the wedding. That wasn't entirely untrue. But there was another reason. I wanted to understand why Ashley had suddenly returned to my life. The town hadn't changed much. The same streets, the same small cafes, the same grocery store where my mother used to shop every Saturday morning. Everything looked familiar. Everything except me. I no longer felt like the frightened 17-year-old girl who counted the minutes until graduation. Or at least, I wanted to believe I wasn't. After lunch with my aunt, I found myself driving past my old high school. The parking lot was nearly empty. Summer break had already begun. For a few moments, I simply sat inside my car, staring at the building. It looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how fear can make places seem enormous. I almost drove away. Then I noticed the security office still occupied. An older man stepped outside carrying a box of maintenance supplies. It took me a moment to recognize him. Mr. Collins, the school's longtime custodian. He had worked there for as long as anyone could remember. Unlike most teachers, he always seemed to notice the students everyone else overlooked. Back then, he had quietly unlocked empty classrooms whenever I needed somewhere safe to eat lunch. He never asked questions. He never forced conversations. He simply understood. When he recognized me, his face immediately brightened. We spent nearly half an hour catching up. He remembered my parents, asked about my career, congratulated me on the upcoming wedding after noticing the engagement ring on my hand. Before leaving, he mentioned something that caught me completely off guard. He said he had recently seen Ashley. Apparently, she had visited the school only a few weeks earlier. According to him, she spent nearly an hour walking through the old hallways with one of the vice principals. At first, that didn't seem unusual. Former students visited from time to time. Then he casually added another detail. Ashley hadn't been alone. She had arrived with a man. Mr. Collins couldn't remember his name, but he clearly remembered one thing. The man had been wearing a dark blue suit, the exact same color Ryan wore almost every day to work. I immediately dismissed the thought. Blue business suits weren't exactly rare. Thousands of men owned one. Still, the coincidence lingered in my mind all the way home. That evening, while organizing some old family photographs for our wedding slideshow, I opened a box that had belonged to my mother. Hidden beneath several albums was my senior year yearbook. I hadn't looked at it since graduation. Curiosity got the better of me. As I slowly turned each page, the memories returned one after another. Classmates whose names I had forgotten, teachers who had long since retired, clubs I had never joined because I spent most afternoons trying to avoid unwanted attention. Then I reached the final pages, the autograph section. Most messages were short. Good luck. Stay in touch. Have a great summer. Near the bottom of one page, however, someone had written in noticeably darker ink. The handwriting wasn't familiar. The message was surprisingly brief. One day you'll learn the truth. There was no signature, no clue about who had written it. Only those 6 words. I stared at them for several minutes. I couldn't remember seeing them before. Maybe I had simply ignored them all those years ago. Or maybe I hadn't been ready to ask what they meant. For some reason, seeing that sentence now sent a chill down my spine. The anonymous photograph. Ashley's unexpected invitation. Her recent visit to the school. Now this forgotten message hidden inside my yearbook. Individually, none of those things proved anything. Together, they no longer felt like coincidences. Someone had been trying to point me toward something buried in the past. I just didn't know what I was supposed to find, and with the wedding now less than 3 weeks away, I was running out of time to discover it. The anonymous message inside my yearbook stayed in my thoughts for days. One day you'll learn the truth. 6 simple words, No signature, no explanation. The more I thought about them, the more I became convinced they hadn't been written as a joke. Someone had wanted me to know something. The problem was, I had no idea what that truth was supposed to be. As the wedding grew closer, my anxiety became harder to ignore. Friends assumed I was simply overwhelmed by planning the ceremony. In many ways, they were right. But it wasn't the flowers, or the seating chart, or the endless appointments. It was the growing feeling that pieces of my past were quietly moving back into my life. And someone else seemed to know exactly why. A week later, I met with our photographer to finalize the schedule for the wedding day. The meeting lasted less than an hour. When I stepped outside, I noticed a small cafe across the street. I decided to stop for coffee before driving home. As I waited in line, I recognized a familiar face sitting near the window. It took me several seconds to remember where I had seen her. She had been one of Ashley's closest friends in high school. Her name was Lauren. Unlike Ashley, Lauren had never bullied me directly. She simply stood nearby. She laughed when everyone else laughed. She watched everything happen without ever trying to stop it. I doubted she even remembered me. But I remembered her. For several minutes, I debated whether to leave. Instead, I ordered my coffee and sat quietly at another table. I wasn't trying to listen. The cafe was simply too small to avoid overhearing parts of nearby conversations. Lauren appeared to be speaking with another woman about an upcoming wedding. At first, I paid little attention. Then I heard Ashley's name. Immediately, my focus shifted. The conversation wasn't loud. Only scattered sentences reached me, enough to understand that Ashley had recently been invited to a wedding she had not expected to attend. Lauren sounded surprised by the invitation. The other woman sounded even more surprised that Ashley had accepted it. Then came one sentence that refused to leave my mind. According to Lauren, Ashley had said she almost declined because he already knew everything. I froze. He, not she, not they. He. There was only one man connected to that wedding, Ryan. The conversation quickly changed to another topic. Neither woman seemed aware that anyone nearby had been listening. I finished my coffee in silence before leaving. The drive home felt much longer than usual. He already knew everything. What exactly did Ryan know? Everything about what? Was Ashley referring to the bullying? That didn't make sense. Ryan had learned about that years ago from me. There would be no reason to describe it as a secret. No. Whatever Ashley meant, it was something else. Something I had never been told. That evening, Ryan mentioned that he would be working late the following Thursday. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned it. Instead, I quietly remembered something. The same Thursday happened to be the day Ashley had posted online that she would be traveling for an important event. It could still be nothing. People traveled every day. Coincidences happened. But lately, there seemed to be far too many coincidences. I hated what I was becoming. Suspicious, distrustful, constantly searching for connections that might not even exist. This wasn't who I wanted to be. I loved Ryan, or at least, I loved the man I believed I knew. The problem was beginning to feel painfully simple. If I truly knew him, why did it suddenly seem like everyone else shared a part of his life that I didn't? For the first time since he proposed, I found myself wondering whether the wedding should continue at all. Not because I had discovered a lie, because I could feel one waiting to be uncovered, and every instinct I had told me the truth wasn't hiding in my past anymore. It was hiding in Ryan's. After that afternoon, I stopped looking for coincidences. There had been too many already. Instead, I decided to look for facts. Facts couldn't be misunderstood. Facts couldn't be explained away by bad timing or overthinking. They either existed, or they didn't. The following weekend, I drove back to my hometown once again. This time, I wasn't interested in my old school. I wanted to find someone who remembered Ashley before everyone else started pretending high school had been perfect. Small towns have a peculiar way of preserving memories. People move away, businesses close, children grow into adults. Yet somehow everyone still knows everyone else's story. I spent most of the morning walking through the town square before stopping at a small bakery my mother used to visit every Saturday. The owner recognized me immediately. She asked about my family, congratulated me on my engagement after noticing the ring on my finger. As we spoke, Ashley's name came up naturally. The owner's smile faded almost instantly. She hesitated for a moment before quietly mentioning that Ashley had returned to town more frequently over the past few years. Not to visit family, to meet someone. She didn't know who. Only that Ashley often parked near the old community center and stayed for less than an hour before leaving again. The conversation ended there. It wasn't much, but it was enough to convince me that Ashley's connection to my hometown hadn't completely disappeared. Later that afternoon, I drove past the community center. The building looked exactly as I remembered. Old brick walls, a faded basketball court, the playground where neighborhood children still gathered after school. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed a bulletin board near the entrance. Covered among flyers for charity events and local fundraisers was a photograph from a volunteer program held several years earlier. Dozens of smiling faces stood together outside the building. My eyes moved across the picture without much interest. Then they stopped. Ashley was standing in the back row. A few feet away stood Ryan. This time, there was no room for coincidence. The caption beneath the photograph listed every volunteer by name. Ryan's name appeared directly beneath hers. The event had taken place almost 3 years before we met. I stared at the photograph for what felt like several minutes. It didn't prove they knew each other well, but it proved something much simpler. They had met, long before I ever entered Ryan's life. That evening, I searched through old photographs on Ryan's social media. Most of the older posts had long since been deleted. Only a handful remained. One image caught my attention. It showed several volunteers cleaning a local park. The faces were difficult to make out, but after enlarging the picture several times, I recognized Ashley again, standing only a few feet behind Ryan. Not beside him, not posing together, yet unmistakably part of the same group. Until that moment, I had believed Ryan's invitation might have come from sympathy. Perhaps Ashley had apologized. Perhaps she had changed. Perhaps he simply believed people deserved second chances. Now another possibility emerged. What if they hadn't reconnected recently at all? What if they had known each other for years? That thought refused to leave me. For the rest of the evening, I found myself replaying every conversation Ryan and I had ever had about my past. Whenever I mentioned Ashley, he had always listened carefully. He never asked many questions. He never seemed surprised. At the time, I believed that was because he trusted me completely. Now I wondered whether something else explained his silence. Had he already known who Ashley was? Had he recognized the name the very first time I mentioned it? Or had he spent years pretending he didn't? The answers seemed painfully close. Yet every time I reached for one, another question appeared. The wedding was now less than 2 weeks away. Family members were arriving from out of state. The final payments had been made. Everything was ready. Everything. Except my peace of mind. For the first time since saying yes to Ryan's proposal, I began wondering whether I truly knew the man I was about to marry, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice kept asking the same question. If Ryan had known Ashley all along, what else had he chosen not to tell me? The closer the wedding came, the more exhausted I became. Not from planning, from thinking. Every answer I found seemed to create 2 new questions. Ryan and Ashley had clearly crossed paths years before we met. That much was no longer a theory. It was a fact. What I still couldn't understand was why Ryan had never mentioned it. If their connection had been harmless, why keep it a secret? One evening, while searching for an email from our florist, I accidentally opened Ryan's shared calendar. We occasionally used the same account to coordinate wedding appointments, so there was nothing unusual about seeing his schedule. Most of the entries were exactly what I expected. Work meetings, gym sessions, dinner with his parents, final appointments with our wedding vendors. Then one event caught my attention. It had taken place a little over a month earlier. The title was surprisingly simple. Coffee meeting. No location. No additional notes. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but what made it stand out was that Ryan rarely left his calendar blank. Every work meeting included an address. Every doctor's appointment listed the clinic. Every dinner reservation named the restaurant. This one contained almost nothing. Curiosity lingered in my mind for the rest of the evening. A few days later, while organizing receipts for our wedding expenses, I noticed one from a cafe downtown. The date matched the mysterious calendar entry almost exactly. The receipt showed 2 drinks, 2 desserts, and a payment made by Ryan. It was an ordinary receipt, yet it no longer felt ordinary. I wasn't trying to prove that Ryan had been unfaithful. Oddly enough, that possibility no longer felt like the most likely explanation. Whatever was happening seemed older than our relationship, more complicated. Almost as though I had stepped into the middle of a story that had begun years before I ever met him. The following Saturday, I attended my bridal shower. Friends and relatives filled the room with laughter, gifts, and wedding advice. For a few hours, I almost forgot everything that had been troubling me. Then one of my college friends handed me her phone. She had been scrolling through social media when something unexpectedly appeared. A photograph from a local charity fundraiser. It had been uploaded only 2 days earlier. Several volunteers stood together after the event. Among them, Ryan, and only a few feet away, Ashley. Unlike the older photographs I had found, this one was recent, very recent. The event had taken place while Ryan told me he was attending a work conference. I stared at the picture far longer than I intended. No one around me noticed the expression on my face. Everyone remained busy opening gifts and taking pictures. Only I seemed frozen in place. The image itself wasn't inappropriate. Ryan wasn't standing beside Ashley. They weren't touching. They weren't even looking toward each other. But that almost made it worse. It suggested they were comfortable enough being in the same place without needing to acknowledge it. As though seeing each other wasn't unusual. As though it happened often enough to feel normal. For the rest of the afternoon, I struggled to smile. Every congratulations from friends reminded me how close the wedding had become. Only 10 days remained. 10 days before, I promised to spend the rest of my life with someone who appeared to know far more about my past than he had ever admitted. That night, I finally stopped asking myself whether Ryan was hiding something. He was. The only mystery left was why. And somewhere deep inside, I began to fear that whatever Ashley planned to bring to our wedding wasn't meant to ruin the ceremony. It was meant to reveal a truth that had been hidden for years. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. The sky was clear. The venue looked exactly as I had imagined it for months. Fresh flowers lined the aisle. Friends and family filled the seats. Everyone smiled as though they were about to witness the happiest day of my life. Only I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For nearly 2 weeks, I had lived with questions that refused to leave my mind. Ryan had known Ashley before he met me. He had invited her without telling me. Someone had anonymously reminded me of my past, and somehow, every path seemed to lead back to the same 2 people. Even so, I walked down the aisle. Part of me still believed there had to be an explanation. I wanted to believe that love was stronger than suspicion. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. Everything unfolded as planned until the officiant invited anyone with a legal reason to object to the marriage. Most people expect silence during that moment. Instead, someone slowly stood from the 3rd row. Ashley. The room fell, completely silent. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry. She simply looked exhausted. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to continue. Then she quietly explained that she hadn't attended the wedding to ruin it. She had come because she could no longer live with a secret that had followed both of us since high school. Years earlier, during our final year of school, someone had anonymously reported that exam answers had been stolen. The school investigated. Without solid evidence, rumors spread quickly. Within days, many students believed I had been responsible. That accusation became the beginning of months of humiliation. The rumors isolated me from almost everyone. Eventually, Ashley became the loudest voice repeating them. What I never knew was that the accusation had been false from the very beginning. Ashley admitted she had discovered the truth only weeks later. Another student had confessed privately before transferring to another school. The administration chose not to reopen the investigation because graduation was only weeks away. They wanted to avoid scandal. Ashley knew my reputation had been destroyed because of a lie. She also knew she had helped spread it. But instead of admitting the truth, she stayed silent for 12 years. Many guests looked toward me. Others looked toward Ryan. That was when Ashley revealed the part that changed everything. Several years earlier, long before Ryan proposed, the 2 of them met while volunteering for the same community outreach program. Over time, they became acquaintances. One afternoon, the conversation unexpectedly turned toward high school. Ryan mentioned my name. Ashley immediately recognized it. Consumed by guilt, she told him everything. She admitted that I had never done what people accused me of. She admitted she had watched my life fall apart without ever trying to stop it. She admitted she had wanted to apologize for years but never found the courage. Ryan listened to the entire story, and then he made a decision. He never told me. Instead, he believed the past would only hurt me if it resurfaced. He convinced himself that protecting me meant keeping the truth hidden. Months later, when we became engaged, Ashley contacted him again. She wanted one opportunity to apologize in person before we began our married life. Ryan agreed, without asking me, without considering whether that choice belonged to him. He believed forgiveness would set me free. He never realized that forgiveness can only exist after someone is given the truth. Standing there, surrounded by everyone we loved, I finally understood why Ryan had hidden everything. He hadn't been protecting himself. He had been trying to protect me. But love doesn't give someone the right to choose another person's truth. For years, he had decided what I deserved to know. He had taken away my chance to decide for myself. That hurt more than Ashley's confession. Because betrayal feels different when it comes from the person you trust most. The ceremony never continued. Not because I hated Ryan, not because Ashley appeared, but because I realized I no longer recognized the relationship I was about to promise for the rest of my life. A marriage cannot begin with a truth that someone deliberately buried. In the weeks that followed, Ryan apologized repeatedly. He accepted responsibility without making excuses. He admitted that every decision had been driven by fear. Fear that I would relive my worst memories. Fear that I would leave him if I believed he had hidden something so important. Ironically, his silence became the very reason I walked away. Ashley also apologized. This time there were no witnesses, no ceremony, no audience, only two women carrying the weight of the same painful chapter in very different ways. I accepted her apology, not because it erased the past, because I no longer wanted the past to decide my future. Forgiveness wasn't something I gave Ashley. It was something I gave myself. Months later, I looked back on the day my wedding ended. People often asked whether I regretted calling it off. The answer was always the same. No. Canceling a wedding cost me thousands of dollars. Going through with it would have cost me something far more valuable. Trust. Today, I don't remember that day as the day I lost a husband. I remember it as the day I finally stopped letting other people decide which truths I was allowed to live with. Sometimes, the hardest betrayal isn't discovering that someone lied. It's discovering they believed they had the right to decide what you should never know. Many people have asked whether Ryan and I ever found our way back to each other. We didn't. Not because love disappeared, because trust had. As for Ashley, she eventually began speaking publicly about bullying at local schools and volunteered with organizations that supported teenagers struggling with harassment. She couldn't change what happened 12 years earlier. None of us could. But she finally stopped running from it. And perhaps that was the only honest ending our story was ever going to have. Thanks for listening to today's Reddit story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe to Reddit Stories, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.